I started with a spinnerbait to quickly cover the shallow end of the lake as I fished my way towards the main basin, but I just wasn't feeling it and switched to pitching a jig and craw to the pad edge pretty quickly. Do you ever fish through a stretch of water and just know you needed to move? That was me in the shallow bay first thing in the morning. I was anxious to get out to the main basin and get serious. Once out on the break line, I started throwing the jig and worm that's been my primary fish getter for the past few trips. I was getting bit, but it felt like the fish wanted me to work way too hard for a very modest reward.
The cherry.
It didn't take too long for me to put down the light jig head rigged worm and pick up something beefier, specifically the living rubber jig and karate craw combo that produced my late day flurry last time out. That's when things started to get really interesting. I caught one a bit over 4.5 on the jig and karate craw almost immediately.
That's a good one.
Yeah. Man, did that fish hit hard. I had turned the GoPro toward the port gunnel to record landing and releasing the fish and had to climb back down off the front deck to re-aim it after I'd already made the next cast. Naturally, I got a hit before I even got back onto the front deck, so I set the hook, then climbed back on the front deck to fight and land the fish.
Nice.
A 100 feet or so farther down that drop-off, my jig and craw got hammered again, and again it was a decent fish.
Supposed to get bigger. They're coming in pairs today.
The next cast brought another hit and another good bass landed.
Are you throwing a jig yet?
Nah, gonna.
Oh, suddenly I have no more claws on my craw. Oh, I still have one.
Okay.
Has no gasoline motor on the boat. I was still throwing the jig and karate craw, but it took just a bit more time to generate another bite. It was worth the effort though, as it was another quality bite.
take out my black jig in a minute.
Yeah. Oh, dragging weeds up and
We moved a bit farther on and spent a few moments tossing the bull and catching up with old friends Billy Stevens and Dave, who were fishing their way around the lake in the opposite direction.
What does he say in one spot?
Finally, having moved out of the shade cast by the steep bank we'd been fishing, I shed the windbreaker I'd been wearing since we launched almost 2 hours earlier. Unfortunately, we then hit a dry spell after leaving Billy and Dave. Carl caught one fish during the next hour or so, but I was getting desperate. Eventually, I tried changing the trailer on my jig, exchanging the craw for a big, heavy Kitech Flex chunk. I don't know if that change had anything to do with it, but I finally got bit after almost 90 minutes of frustration. It was an okay fish, but on the small side compared to what I'd been catching.
Goddamn jig today hit me.
With the bite so slow on what had been working, I switched back to a plastic worm on a light jig head. Again, I had no idea if the bait change had anything to do with it, but after only one chain pickerel in the mix all morning, as noontime approached, the toothy critters seemed to get very active.
At least the way he's hooked, he's not going to bite my line when I pick up.
Since I'd brought a bunch of old school worms along to experiment with, I started switching worms after every fish or two. Next up was a black grape Mr. Twister BBF, aka Basic Bass Food. I think that particular flat-tailed worm was only on the market for a couple seasons back in the 80s, or was it the 90s? Anyway, I caught the snot out of fish with it back then, and it seemed like the bass several generations removed from the ones that used to attack it had pretty much the same reaction. In the decades that I've been fishing this place, I'd bet I caught more big fish there on a 9-inch violet fliptail than any other soft plastic. Unfortunately, that would not be the case today. You know, it just doesn't seem right to throw the biggest worm in your box and end up catching one of your smallest fish of the day. We exchanged pleasantries with a couple in the third boat on the lake. Their corgi was very excited as the guy was bringing in a fish, and I thought he might jump into the lake to get at that fish. The corgi, not the fisherman. Next up in the worm parade was an old Zoom speedworm. I believe this worm may still be in Zoom's current lineup, but in a very limited color selection. It didn't take too long to catch a bass with it, though.
I was going to say, did you see that one jump? I see a rod back.
Most of the fish I'm catching here are coming within 5 to 8 feet of the outer edge of the vegetation growth, which at this stage is 12 to 14 feet down. Some of my fish are coming from 8 or 9 feet of water, and some are as deep as 18 to 20. But they're all within a few yards of the deep edge of the weeds.
See if he'll spring it. Oh, yeah.
This place has had its ups and downs over the nearly 60 years that I've been fishing it, but to this old man it sure does feel like it's moving into another strong period.
That's better.
It wasn't a weed.
I guess they can't all be chunks, but I wouldn't mind catching this one again in, say, 3 years or so.
You're not a big girl, you know that. You're just a little twerp. This year. All right, we'll just stop using all this.
As much fun as I had playing around with plastic worms from 40 or 50 years ago, the living rubber jig and karate craw trailer has been my best producer today and on more freshwater outings over the last 6 weeks than anything else I've thrown. Actually, I shouldn't call it a living rubber jig because the skirts have silicone on most of my jigs these days.
Definitely got a head.
Years ago, I would fish this stuff with a Texas rigged worm, but over the years, I've migrated to fishing plastic worms almost exclusively on jig heads. And of course, I make heavy use of the jig and pig on weed edges and drop-offs too. Of course, there are still some situations that call for a Texas rig, particularly when fishing around timber and brush.
Some kind of small fish pulling on my worm. Was not good enough. I thought I was going to catch him. I did.
The pickerel unfortunately continued to interrupt my bass fishing on a too frequent basis. It's not like Lakeville where the picks grow bigger than the bass and are fun to catch. These are just run-of-the-mill little 2-pound skinny, toothy fish.
Hey, stupid. BBF, basic bass food, not pickerel food.
For 8 weeks or months.
Oh, I'm getting bit a lot. You don't even count, you know that? You are a sorry excuse for a bass, but I love you.
I guess it's getting to be time to pick up that jig and craw and get serious about trying to get another quality fish or 3 on our way back toward the ramp.
Ooh, that was a pickerel. I'm no longer on the jig. It's caught me on my fish for the last 2 trips.
You lost it?
Yeah, oh yeah, he bit me right off. See?
Yeah.
That fish bit clean through the 20-pound test fluoro leader on my jig rod and was gone with my jig before I even had a chance to swing on it. And with that unfortunate turn of events, I decided that I was done catching bass for the day, and it was time to put the electric motor on high and boogie back toward the boat ramp as fast as 80 pounds of thrust would move us.